All right, Mr. Louie Burke, thank you very much for coming on to the boxingbar.com and welcome.
Thanks, Albert. I appreciate you having me on.
And let's go ahead and start with the first question I ask everybody. Let's get to know you a little bit. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and it's pretty much where I was raised. I left Las Cruces when I was boxing, and then as a trainer, I left Las Cruces. So I was in and out quite a bit during the 80s and 90s. And then when my daughter was born in 94, I came back home, but I continued training fighters, but I had to start from scratch. I started these guys from amateurs, and now some of them developed into some pretty good pros right now, and that's who I'm working with.
And what was it like living there in Las Cruces where you were growing up?
That's a nice town. Everybody knew each other. It's a lot smaller than it is now. We have a lot of people moving in because it's probably the most friendliest town I've ever been in, in all my travels, and I've just been fortunate enough to live here, and everybody gets along, the climate's real nice. It gets a little hot in the summer, but, it's high altitude, so it's a perfect place to train. We're at 4,000 feet. It doesn't get really cold, and in the summer, like I said, it gets a little warm, but it's nothing like Phoenix weather or Tucson weather, so it's milder in the summers.
What was your relationship with your parents when you were growing up as a kid?
I was fortunate. I grew up in a really good household. My mom, she worked, and my father worked. And my father was my first boxing trainer, him and another man named Larry that was from Hawaii that came into Las Cruces through the military. And they were my first trainers. And I felt very fortunate that I was able to have the family that I did. My mom was very supportive of my boxing career, as was, of course, my father. And then I have a younger sister and an older brother. My brother boxed as well. Now he's a popular referee on TV. You see him a lot on Spanish-speaking networks. He speaks fluent Spanish. Even though our last name is Burke, my mom is Hispanic, and my dad was half Hispanic. My dad was half Irish and half Mexican. So, we grew up speaking Spanish in this area, and then grew up with Hispanic culture. We were also proud to be Irish as well. So.
Well, what a combination of fighting blood. I mean, the Irish and the Mexicans they're considered to be some of the best boxers in the world.
Yeah, it does that.
I'm thinking maybe Canelo's also of some kind of Irish descent as well.
Well, he looks it, and going back in history, there's a lot of, during the U.S.-Mexican War, there's a lot of Irish that when they went down to Mexico, they stayed in Mexico, during the time of the potato famine, and a lot of them, came in and the only means of making any money was to join the military. So then they joined the military, and they were sent down to Mexico to fight the war. But the Catholic religion, a lot of their culture were very similar. There was, of course, a language barrier, but the culture itself is very similar. A lot of them stayed down in Mexico, and it's a very strong possibility. Canelo is one of the ones that he does have. It looks like he does have some Irish descent in him.
Yeah, and actually I was talking to Wayne McAuliffe, who's from Ireland. He said the same thing. He said he's gone to Mexico City, and there's a lot of statues of Irishmen, that settle there in Mexico. So I wouldn't doubt it. And you talked about your dad and your brother being boxers. Is that how you got into sport, by, following in their footsteps?
Yeah, well, my dad was a boxer, and he boxed in the Marine Corps, and he came back, and he was a trainer. In fact, the gym that we train out is called the Sammy Burke Youth Boxing Center. He was very instrumental in starting the boys club back in the 60s here in Las Cruces, and he was just very involved with the youth of Las Cruces. And when my brother and I were old enough to box, we grew up in the gym from day one. I always remember just being in the gym, always training somebody. Even as a young man at 16, my dad said some of the best way to learn and to be a better boxer yourself is to get some of these kids under your wing and teach them from the ground up, and that gives you a better understanding on why you have to keep your hands up, your chin down, and just the basics that a lot of people, nowadays, like foot positioning, they don't teach that, and you see a lot of people that don't work on mechanics. And so my dad, when I was 16 years old, he gave me the new guys. They're coming in to teach them from the ground up, and it just evolved from there, from the new guys to the more experienced amateurs to the pros. I was training pros when I was a pro myself, and I'd come back home and work with, we had a little stable of fighters here in Las Cruces. They were all tough guys, a lot of them didn't have the athleticism to compete at a high level, but they were all tough, and none of them had losing records, They were well conditioned, and they had strong mechanics, so it just paid off. Something that was one of the things that I took from my father was the ability to coach and train and to communicate with kids and fighters.
What was your amateur career like?
I think I was maybe just above average amateur. I wasn't great. My style was a pro style. I was able to compete, at a higher level. I wouldn't consider myself great because my style was pro style, and I was able to conform in the pro style. The pros a lot quicker, and I did much better. And as a professional, and I was an amateur, I felt more comfortable as well.
Do you think it's important to have an extensive amateur career, or does it depend more on the person's style, like you're saying?
Well, they all have their benefits. They're both pros and cons. You see guys that have a ton of amateur experience that leave it in the amateurs. And I used to see that back, in the like 60s and 70s. Guys spoke in the 70s, but my dad had trained guys. Some of them had as many as 300 plus amateur fights. And when they got in the pros, they were all right, but they weren't, they didn't live up to expectations as their amateur career. Their pedigree as an amateur, and sometimes I think you can have too many amateur fights, and I think style does have somewhat to do with it. You get the guys that fight the amateur style, which is just now it's become almost a game of tag, and we touch one and the other, and there's a pros, you have to teach these guys to sit down in their punches and to follow up and utilize their weight and to maximize their power and slow things down a little bit, and some of them have a hard time making that adjustment. Usually, you can make the adjustment because the guy has the athleticism, so you're able to. If he has good speed, good mechanics, he's a good athlete. You can make the adjustment. Just take some time. But some just they find it very difficult.
For your pro debut fight in San Antonio, Texas, what do you remember right before you went through the drape there for the first time for your pro debut?
Oh yeah, definitely. I remember my dad, he was one of the U.S. boxing coaches, so he was in Cuba. He wasn't with me at the time. And I didn't have my regular trainer with me, so my brother was working my corner. And he was so nervous that when he went to wrap my hands, he kept dropping the wraps. So I was like, yeah, I just don't let me wrap my own hands, Let me wrap my own hands. And, I went out and I fought a guy. It was a 4-rounder. I think I stopped him in the 3rd round, but when I dropped him, I remember correctly, he hit me with the left hook, and it broke my eardrum. At the same time that I had thrown a left hook to the body and caught him. I think he was a right hand. He hit me with the right hand in the ear, and I caught him a left hook to the body. And he dropped and didn't get back up, and I had buzzing in my ear. And so, the first time I ever had my eardrum broken, one of 3 times. So
wow.
That was the first one, and that's what I remember, is catching the guy with a body shot and breaking my eardrum, and my brother not being able to wrap my hands because he was so nervous, So those are the 3 biggest things that I remember about that experience, about that fight.
And after that, your first dozen fights or so, I mean, you were knocking everybody out, it seemed like. What would you say power was one of your biggest strengths or assets?
No, not at all. In fact, I had gained more power as I was getting older, or more as my career went on, but I had less knockouts because the quality of opponents was going up. What killed me was I was having trouble making weight. I probably should have fought about 10 pounds heavier than I was actually fighting. And the weight I was losing, and it was actually, it was bothering, it was really hurting my performance. And I felt like I was losing power. In the gym, I felt my mechanics, everything, I was actually had more power in the gym, but then when it came down to fight time, because of the loss of weight, I wasn't able to sustain that, and I just lost power. But why did I knock these guys out was my conditioning. I could throw and throw for however many rounds I needed to. I could just, I would stay on somebody, and I would just continually throw punches from the beginning to the end. And a lot of times I beat these guys just by wearing them down. The ability of just to continue throwing punches throughout a fight.
You fight Freddie Roach not only once but twice. You got the ESPN Super Featherweight title, from beating him the first time. What was it like fighting Freddie Roach in the ring? Was he a tough competitor?
Yeah, no, Freddie's a fierce competitor. I mean, it shows in his training ability as well. I mean, he was fierce. He just. I remember the first time I saw. ESPN fights. There was Fast Freddie Roach. They called him Fast Freddie Roach at the time. And, they made this big deal about this kid that was originally from, I think, Massachusetts and then living in Vegas now. And, and he did, he was beating these guys in some great fights, and then I came out. I ran into an old buddy of mine, and I hadn't seen him in years. He goes, man, he says, hey Louie, man, I wish you best luck, but you gotta remember one thing, man. He says, do me a favor, don't ever fight this guy. They call Fast Freddie Roach, man. The guy's bad, and he's you don't want anything to do with him, man. That guy, I'd have to say he'd kick your butt, So I was like, from that time on, I was like, man, I hope I fight that guy. And ironically, about a month later, I got the call, hey, guess who you're fighting? I go, ooh, it's got Freddie Roach. I was like, man, perfect, So I went into, a very intense mode of training from that time on, and so I was ready to fight Freddie, It was a good boost. I was excited. I'd heard a lot about him. I actually, I really respected him as a fighter even before I fought him. It was a thrill for me to be at that level. That was the first time I thought I took to an elite level and fighting him. And it was on TV. And, of course, Cruces at the time was a small town. I mean, it still is, but it was a lot smaller back then. And I came home, a hero, because I was on TV. Anytime you're on TV, whether you sell used cars or mattresses or whatever, man, you come in town, you're a celebrity. And so
Yeah.
that was, it was nice. It was pretty overwhelming for somebody that was only 22 years old. And I found 2 days after my 22nd birthday, so we had a nice celebration, and it was really a special moment in my life. And I had a lot of respect for Freddie then, and I have a lot of respect for him now too. And it's just I'm actually proud of what he's done for boxing. He's been a great ambassador for us.
Yeah, and then you go on and fight guys like Charlie White, White Lightning Brown, and Hector Camacho, and then you finish off your career, of a 19-3, record at a pretty young age. Why'd you stop at the age of 25 from fighting?
I had 2 orbital fractures, 2 eye socket fractures, one on each eye, and then my last fight, on top of having a broken orbit, I had also dehydrated because I was told that in 2 months after this guy that I fought, I think it was Rocky Alonso, I was supposed to fight Bobby Chacon in 2 months. He was on his way down, and that if I beat him, which was, we had planned, because he was on his way down, and he was a name that I was going to beat him, and he was going to set me up with the fight with Julio Cesar Chavez at the time, and he at 130 pounds for the 130-pound title. Of course, I couldn't make that weight, but that drove me. Last time I made 130 was the first time I fought Freddie Roach, which was 2-3 years before, and of course that motivated me though to try to do everything I can to lose the weight and make it. And it took me, I think, 2-3 times on the scale, and I finally made it. But the fights at the time, by the time I made weight, it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and the fight, if I remember correctly, was 3 in the afternoon, 3 or 4 in the afternoon. I didn't have enough time to rehydrate. It's not like it is now where you weigh in the day before. When there was a tough fight, you weighed in the day of back then. And I just didn't have enough time to rehydrate and to eat and get all my nutrients and strength back. And so, I almost died. I was given, I collapsed during the fight. I was given my last rites by Bishop Ramirez here in Las Cruces. I had a 0 potassium level, which the nurse told me, in a career that was 15 years long at the time. She'd only seen 3 other patients that had a 0 potassium level, and all of them had died except for me. And my kidneys were shutting down because I had uremic poisoning that was going through my body, so they had to get that out. It was just after that, I just didn't feel the same anymore. I didn't have the drive. That took a lot out of me, and I felt my biggest asset was my conditioning and working hard and loving the gym. And when I lost that, I didn't think, I didn't feel I'd be the fighter that I once was, and I just was tired of getting hurt at that time, So I went to training, and I taught the guys I teach now. I teach them defense, a lot more defense. I'm a big defensive guy because I was an offensive guy as a fighter, and that's one of the reasons maybe my career was shortened as well. I sustained cuts and I had to be in great condition all the time, which all fighters should be, because there's a possibility that they're going to get injured if they're not in the top shape. But I was probably doing too much, at the time, and so it was just it's time for me to get out, and I just didn't have the drive anymore after that last fight. I did fight a couple of times after that. I did a little stint in kickboxing where I fought a guy, and then just for the heck of it, and then I turned around and fought many years later, I was asked to come out of the audience. It was a non-sanctioned pro fight that they're having on an Indian reservation, and they asked me to come out of the audience to save the main event. And I came out and fought this guy, last minute, and won a decision. But I told him, look, I can't go 10 rounds because I haven't fought in 10 years. Yeah. And it was right before my 40th birthday, for like a week or two. And I told him, but to save the show, you pay me up front, and I'll get in, and I'll go 4 rounds. I'll give it a good 4 rounds. So I'd say the guy fight. He was a slow starter, so I started out quick and was able to out-hustle him for 4 rounds. So I won the fight. I went to Disneyland 2 days later.
And you're training guys like Austin Trout. How is that going for you right now?
Austin, I've known Austin since he was 10 years old when he walked in the gym, and that's really been, and I trained A.B. Hahn, who's 16-0, be fighting in the card of the Julio Cesar Chavez fight at the Sun Bowl in his hometown of El Paso. In fact, they're all here getting ready to spar with Austin right now, but it's been a pleasure, man. Seeing these guys come up from, I didn't get these guys as blue chip athletes. I got them as kids that didn't know the difference between a left hook and a fish hook, and I had to teach them everything. So it's been a great sense of accomplishment as far as that goes, because I've seen them grow up as fighters, as men, as fathers and whatnot, and it's been a pleasure, I mean, you see, when they're down and when they're up, and you see them make mistakes. It's like the kid that grows up in your neighborhood. You see when they've been at their worst, and you see when they've been at their best, but you have that pride because, you've seen them grow up, and turn out to be a productive citizen and do well in boxing, something that they love. So, it's a special pride, more than just getting some guy in that's already made and sending him out there and trying to teach him a few things. Because these guys, you teach more than just how to throw a jab and how to throw a right hand, left hook. You teach them the skills of life skills. You teach them things about life. You're there when they need you. You're there when they're down, when things have gone bad. You get to be very close to these guys. And
right, them inside out. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been. I couldn't ask for. Everything turns out for a reason. And coming back home, that's been the most pleasurable thing. Besides raising my 2 kids, is that I get to see these guys mature and grow up as adults.
And how does Louie Burke want to be remembered? And what message do you want to give your fans and all the people that used to watch you and love watching you and the sport of boxing?
Well, just as a good person that loves people. I love people. I love to help people. I tried my hardest to be a good father. I try and instill that on my fighters. To take up the responsibility. Some of them, have become young fathers, and to take the responsibility of and stepping up to be a father that cares and that is responsible, and not only in the family but also in the community, and just somebody that tries to inspire these guys to do that for themselves, so they have a better life going on, a better life for their families. Also somebody that when I train, my biggest objective is to when these guys, when their career is finished, I want them to be able to have their own business. I want for them to be able to speak without having any problems. I have the responsibility to say, hey, when it's time to quit. And I don't have any problem doing that. When I see one of my guys, if I think they're taking too much, and, I tell them, and that's why I emphasize so much on defense and working on stuff. I want them to have a career after boxing. And that's my biggest objective is being a coach. I think in the long run is just that's my biggest responsibility that I have to them and their families. So if they trust me with that, that, and they train with me, then that's something that one day they might have to hear. Whether they like it or not, it's time to step out of the ring and do something else.
And Louie, thank you very much for giving us all those great fights that you did and forcing us to remember who you were. And thank you very much for all your time and coming on here. I know you're very busy. I know you got Austin Trout inside there waiting for you. But thank you very much for your time.
Okay, Albert, thank you. It's been a pleasure.